Hello, and welcome to the How We Do Digital Ministry podcast. I'm your host, Charlotte Elia, and on this podcast, we talk to leaders who are out in the world engaging folks through digital ministry. Today, I am delighted to have the Reverend Dr. Karyn Wiseman with me. She's a professor of homiletics at United Lutheran Seminary and lead pastor at Gloria Dei Church in Huntington Valley, Pennsylvania. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, hey, I am delighted to be here. I saw the title of the podcast and I'm like, I'm in.
Wonderful. So I wonder if you would kind of open us up by giving us sort of the lay of the land as you see it. What's on your mind right now?
Yeah, one of the things about being in the church and being in the academy is sort of trying to vision what's going to happen in, 4 years, 5 years, 8 years, 10 years in the church. And one of the things that's happened in seminaries for a long time is we trained preachers for the church that we had at that moment. We weren't training preachers and pastors for the church that will be. And I think some of that had begun to turn sort of pre-COVID and sort of talking about more entrepreneurial ideas about ministry and started talking about more collaborative mission and church sort of relationships. And we had talked about sort of being in public ministry, sort of what is our public our public life in the church, and trying to understand that people of faith, they're responsible for sort of taking care of the world as it is and envisioning the world that may come. And I think before COVID hit, we really were beginning to get a sense of what the church might look like in the future. And then COVID hit, and then we had the 2020 election, and then we had, the January 6th insurrection, and we went on Zoom, and, church was trying to figure out where its place was in digital ministry, and the academy was trying to figure that out. And I think all of that thrown at us at once was a little more than the institutional church or the theological academy could sort of handle. And so right now, what's emerging is this understanding that we can't go back about digital ministry. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of churches that were scrambling to try to find some way to get their message out. And so their first services was their iPhone, on a choir stand, and they were doing it, from their house. And then I saw all of these messages coming along Facebook. What's the best, what's the best camera to use for Zoom services? What is the best, digital setup that we need to have in our church so that we're doing rich and vibrant and creative and accessible and professional sort of ministry, so that folks who come on, they're like, oh yeah, this feels as close to church as it can be. And that was just a heck of a lot for both churches and the academy to deal with at once. And as a pastor and a professor, I was trying to be a resource for churches and pastors that had never done this before. Mm-hmm. So I did all kinds of web interviews, and I did all kinds of Zoom sessions with churches and with pastors, trying to explain to them how they could maximize their digital presence and do that in a way that honored their understanding of worship, honored their tradition, honored the needs of their members who, some don't even have a laptop to turn on to watch their digital services. So I guess the thing that I've been thinking about the most is how we do public ministry now. Mm. Now that a lot of folks are back in the pews, do we abandon the folks who joined us digitally? My church has said a resounding no. So we were doing online before COVID. We had started doing live streaming a couple of years before that and had been blessed by a donation that allowed us to have like a $70,000 live stream system, multiple cameras and all this kind of stuff. And so we just seamlessly walked into that. One Sunday we were in person, Friday we got locked down, Sunday we were online, just as we always had. We just weren't doing the in-person piece. And I think a lot of churches are trying to figure out, do we still have a Zoom Bible study? Do we still have, check-ins by phone? Do we when people are coming back in person. These are hard conversations. It's shaping a church that was and is and will be, and that's always hard. So that's a lot, but that's sort of where I'm trying to spend a lot of my time is how do we continue to proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ in a way that it uses all the modalities that we have in person, by phone, live streaming, viewing later, all of these different modalities do that well, both in the church and I think in the academy. So, that public ministry, that public witness is huge right now. And how do we navigate that?
Do you see anyone doing that well?
Wow, that's a hard question. There are churches who are doing that well, and they are churches, for the most part, that have always been, we're going to be where the people are, right? Mm-hmm. We're not going to just stay in the safe four walls of the church. Those churches always felt like their ministry was beyond the walls, right? I pastored a church when I first started preaching, and they had a sign above the exit door after you left worship, and it says, "You are now entering the mission field." Mm-hmm. And a sign they had when you came in the church said, "The church is what's left when the preacher leaves town and the building burns down." And it was this dual witness to who they were called to be, this little bitty rural church, that had 80 members maybe, and averaged about 50 in church. They knew that when they left the building, that's what their goal was. They were missionaries for Christ. They were in the world proclaiming the gospel. And they also, as they came in, they were reminded that this building, this preacher, that's not the church. The church is us doing the work. And so that's kind of how I started. And we were doing all kinds of stuff. There wasn't a youth center in town. So we opened up our building and allowed the basement to be turned into a youth area. And it's churches who have seen their lives beyond the people who are sitting in the pews that are continuing to envision this. We're the church online. We're the church when we're doing, our Bible study on Tuesday night. I started ministry in Kansas, and there's a huge mega church there called Church of the Resurrection. It's in Leawood, Kansas, and lead pastor is Adam Hamilton. He hasn't stopped doing Bible study online on I can't remember what night, like Tuesday nights at 7:00, and he'll have hundreds of people that come on and listen to him do Bible study, and he interacts with them. And he didn't do that before COVID, but he knows now he needs to continue that. Mm-hmm. And so it's churches like that have always sort of said, the church is beyond the walls, and the people are the primary focus, not the building, not the fancy, communion set or being in my pew and not having someone sit there who's not supposed to sit there. There's churches who have reached out continuously that I think are making bold and important moves to say, we're going to continue to be dual modality. And if people aren't comfortable in the church, then we have a parking lot service. And if people are not ready to come in for Bible study, then we have Tuesday night Bible study online. So I think we call it at ULS a polymodal relationship. And, we do these modalities like online, in person, whatever. Polymodal means that almost everything you do has multiple outlets, right? And so you're live streaming, you're Zooming, you have folks in the pew. Mm-hmm. And that's what I think is really important right now, is not sticking to the old format. And it's also, hey, we lost some folks, but there's a whole group of younger people who moved into this neighborhood. Why don't we start talking to them about creating another church in our midst, and we'll help parent that church into existence. And so let's raise the money to pay for a pastor to start reaching out to that community. And that's that entrepreneurial, that's that inventive, creative, boundless, right? There's not borders or boundaries on that. Mm-hmm. And so I think the churches, this is good. I heard this one time, that a church has to be permission givers. And church leadership have to be permission givers. So when somebody comes in and says, I have this great idea, it's like, go for it. It doesn't have to go to 6 committees. It doesn't have to be approved in the budget a year from now. It's go for it. We'll find the money and the resources. Let's do it. Let's try it. That's what I want to see in the church. And I think those are the churches that are being successful right now. They've just been giving permission to these new ways to be church. There's a church in Baltimore that, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on it right now. I'll find it and I'll send it to you. So maybe you can put it in the notes.
Okay.
But it's a church that is predominantly queer, and they didn't have any space. And so a church that had space just said, here, use the fellowship hall every Sunday, every time you want to do church. And they're doing mission nights, and they're doing, all these different things. And that's what the church is about. It's about going into the world. Jesus didn't say, hey, let's sit in this chapel and talk. Jesus said, we're going out there. That's where he sent his disciples. That's where he sent the 72. That's what we're called to do.
Do you think it's possible for a church that, has an inward focus, is, a kind of family oriented church, sees themselves as a family? Can they turn themselves inside out?
That's a hard question. There's this balance between viability, right? So you have the resources to be viable, right? And there is this need to be vital, and to be vital doing ministry that enriches the folks who are in the church and hopefully beyond. If those two things aren't lining up, if you have no viability, long-term viability, and you think, we don't really want to be vital, we just want to spend the money that we have. I know of a church that said, we got, there's 6 of us here, and we have $2 million in our endowment fund, and the 6 of us are going to spend as much money as we can. And they got this space that others could be using, and they say no. So it depends on where churches are in that relationship. And so there are churches that want to be vital, and they may not be completely viable. Like the church that I was talking about in Baltimore, they've been given space and given the Synod has helped pay for their pastor. But the vitality, if it's closed in, it can be a moment of grace where you say, this is who we are. Let's say farewell gracefully. Let's say, there's only 6 of us left. No one else is coming in. How might we be partners with others? If you're doing really great ministry and you're focused on your 4 walls, and you've got the money and the resources to do that, and it feels vital and vibrant to you, I would have a hard time with really saying that's a church that can turn around. But there's a possibility. You've just got to reach in there and give them the sales pitch of your life, right? I mean, be entrepreneurial. Say, here's a way that I think we'd be in ministry together. So yeah, they can flip that switch, and they can become more vibrant and vital in the other church that's partnering with them. But I think one of the hardest things for the church is to say, we're done. In this building, in this configuration, we're done. Mm-hmm. How about we end our ministry with a bang by gifting the next community of faith this space? And a lot of people used to say closing a church is the hardest thing that anyone can do. And right now, we got so many of them. They're just hanging on by a thread, and the resources that we pile into that, I struggle with sometimes. I would much rather put a new start in there. And some of those churches say, yep, let's do it. And others say, it's just us.
Yeah.
And that's what some people see in the church, this closed off, it's all about us sort of mentality. And that's hard. Yeah. But I think closing a church can be one of the most holy things that we can do. And then out of that death to birth, like a phoenix rising out of that death to create something new. Wouldn't it be amazing if churches could really, really live into that and sign on for that? Yeah, I think that would be cool.
It would be. Back to the public witness issue. We're going to be stepping on some toes, aren't we there?
I'm okay. Just pull your feet. Don't wear sandals to church that day, right? Wear your steel-toed boots.
Do you have some advice there? I mean, that's very practical advice. I'll take that.
Yeah. But I think one of the hardest things to be a Christian today is to be a Christian publicly and not be a jerk.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of Christians out there that and my apologies to those who are jerks and don't want to be, and my apologies to those who say, I'm not a jerk. How about I try to live differently? But the church is getting a rap right now, a reputation of being closed, conservative, evangelical, anti-gay, pro-choice, anti-woman, anti-Black Lives Matter, people of color of any stripe, and those are the loudest voices in the room right now, right? I mean, I think we can agree on that. The loudest voices in the room right now are the Supreme Court that says the woman's life doesn't matter. We've got to do this for the religious right, and that's why those folks got into the Supreme Court, 3 of them during the Trump administration. And being a Christian out loud during the Trump administration was very difficult because he was proclaiming a faith that was just anathema to who we actually are. He would say, "Don't let the immigrants in. Don't let these folks in. Don't let these people have rights." And I'm saying, but the book you held up says, "Welcome the stranger." The book that you held up says, "Love everybody." The book that you held up said, "Even the most foreign to us, the eunuch receives redemption," right? And
well, in fairness, he did hold that book upside down.
He did. So I think maybe
showing you he was inverting it. Yeah,
there you go. He was inverting it, and maybe when he turned it upside down, some of the teachings just sort of fell out. I'm not sure. But being a public witness sometimes means countering that loud voice that's in the room. So you look on, media stations, and depending on what media you're watching, there are experts from all different fields, and they try to get divergent voices on some of their shows. But when they bring in religious leaders, they bring in these conservative, evangelical, white folks who are espousing a faith that is in union with Christian nationalism. That says, this is our nation. No one else can be here. This is for us. Anyone who's different from us, we don't want them here. And that kind of Christian white nationalism is just BS. It is not following the faith that Jesus proclaimed and taught and left us teachings to follow. And so if that's the loudest voice in the room, then how do I counter that, right? I don't say they're idiots, don't listen to them. I say, I want to counter that. I want to point us to the lessons of Jesus. I want to point us to the moments when even Jesus was corrected and said, "Ooh, you're right." The Syrophoenician woman came to Jesus and she said, "Hey, if I can just have the crumbs under the table that you would give to a dog, I'll take that." And Jesus is like, "Yeah, but you're not one of us." And she's like, "But give me those crumbs." And he says, "Oh, wait a minute. I have to welcome you because I'm a Jew. Jews are about hospitality. And as a rabbi, I'm gonna look at myself in the mirror and go, dang, I was so close. You do deserve what the other children deserve." And he was constantly bringing in the marginalized. He was eating with sinners. I mean, he was busting norms. I mean, if you think Jesus was this meek and mild, baby that grew up into this meek and mild guy, you're not reading the Bible right. He was a systems challenging, rabble rousing, justice making, table throwing, prophet who said, you got to preach the news. You got to preach the good news. You got to preach redemption and restoration and resurrection and wholeness. And that can't be done if I'm saying, but not for you. It can't be done if I say this is just for me and you don't get it. That's not the gospel. That's not the word of God. That is not the teaching of Jesus. And so public witness means going on Facebook and Twitter and different blogs and sharing restoration and wholeness. It means saying in the midst of COVID, it's okay to not be okay. It's okay for you to deal with your mental health issues. Mm-hmm. It's okay for you to be gay and queer and in a home locked in with folks who hate you, that you can find a space and we'll help you do that. It's okay to say on Facebook or Twitter, encountering some of those things. If you read, Matthew 25, or if you read Micah 6:8, or if you read, these stories from the Old Testament, the New Testament of love and acceptance and grace and willingness to share, that then you can't listen to that and accept it. You have to say that's not Christ. That's not the way that Jesus lived. Until the very last moment, mm-hmm. He was saying, I don't really want to die, but it's God's will and I'll do that. And from the cross, he said, even these on the side of me, even these thieves, they have a place in heaven if they repent of their sin. So I can't listen to that loud voice and not counter it. I can't listen to that loud voice and not say, okay, once again, Jesus proclaimed the gospel of grace. I posted a quote that I use in teaching all the time. It says, God doesn't call you for who you might be. God calls you for who you are. Mm. And if that calling is in the classroom, or that calling is on the soccer field coaching, or that calling is doing pavement repair for your city, or that calling is, doing care for folks in a retirement home as the program manager, or serving as a police officer or firefighter or a member of the armed services. Our calling is for who we are. We might and should probably grow, but God loves us for who we are. I'm a queer pastor that is West Texas born, but rejects the rigid understanding of faith in that atmosphere. And I still go home and say, I love you, but you didn't let me be who I was. Mm. And that hurt. And you're not allowing people who I love to be who they are, and to be acknowledged and to be affirmed, and not just be tolerated in the church. So it's amplifying the voice that says God is grace and Jesus is love and Jesus proclaims redemption for all, to counter that at the same time saying, mine can't be the only voice either. I've got to let Latina and Black voices and people on the ridges of society and the trans community speak through me and be amplified as I pull back. And so public witness is this give and take. It's understanding that my white voice, despite the fact that I'm a lesbian and I have been marginalized at times, I have 2 masters and a PhD. That is privilege. Mm-hmm. When I walk into a classroom, people call me Dr. Wiseman. When I walk into a church, people call me Pastor Karyn. That's privilege. And I have to say, I can't, during the 5-year anniversary of George Floyd's death, be the only voice that gets heard. And so I amplify and share the voices of Black folks who are sharing their pain. And I'm trying to sit silently and say, I'm holding you in prayer. I understand that I can't be the voice right now. It's got to be you. But I can hold you in the palm of my hand, just as God holds you in the palm of God's hand. And that's public witness.
Excellent. Thank you. As a professor of homiletics, I'm wondering, has this moment refashioned or re-emphasized certain things about the art of preaching for you? Is there an urgency now that you didn't experience before? Or,
absolutely. It's like a 5-alarm fire, right? I mean, it is an urgency that in one way our public witness, as we hear the religious white nationalism going on, it's an urgency to proclaim from the pulpit what's going on in our world. It is the day after, Parkland, and the day after Columbine, and the day after Detroit, and the day after, El Paso, that we say from the pulpit, gun violence is not okay, that we should be in a world where kids are free to go to school, where parents and teenagers are free to go to the mall, where a Black person can walk down the street with his tea and his Skittles, and guns aren't an end to their life. And that's the truth. That's who Jesus would be. Jesus would not be on the front line saying the Second Amendment is codified forever. Jesus would be saying, You use the cross, you use the whipping pole, you use all these other things, and that violence has to stop. And standing between a woman and a group of guys with stones in their hand, that's who Jesus would be. Mm-hmm. He would be stepping between the gunmen, and it is mainly white, angry men. He would step between the crowd in that gun. And we proclaim that. We also proclaim it after Orlando, after the Pulse nightclub shooting, because those were brown lives. Those were queer lives. It was a Latino night. And mm-hmm. so the mm-hmm. vast majority of folks who were injured and killed were Latino, right? Mm-hmm. They're Latinos. And I have to be just as loud after the Pulse shooting as I was after the Parkland shooting. Mm-hmm. And so from the pulpit, it's important for us to claim those things. And my first PhD student is Leah Shea, who's a professor and a writer, and she wrote a book called Preaching in the Purple Zone. And the truth is that sort of the red as this emblem of conservatism and the blue is this emblem of liberalism or progressiveness or whatever that is, that we don't have all red churches. We don't have all blue churches. We often have purple churches. And in the same pew, you can have someone who went to the January 6th, insurrection and called it a tour of the Capitol. And you could have someone who is the leader of the mothers group in their community dealing with the loss of Black children. Mm-hmm. And they could be sitting there on the same pew. Likely they won't be, but it's possible. And so how do I proclaim the urgency that Jesus would not adhere to a theology of white nationalism and allow that to take place if he was here on earth? We are. And so we have to proclaim that is not who the church is. That is not who Christians are. So there is an urgency, but there's also this fear. And I get this all the time. If I talk about George Floyd, or I talk about, the immigrants on the border, or I talk about, vaccines and that kind of stuff, they're going to run me out on a rail out of my church. And I'm like, then maybe you don't start in the pulpit. Maybe you start in the coffee after the church and you say, how are you guys hearing the news right now? And you offer an adult forum that people come and they talk about gun violence and gun violence prevention, and they talk about what it means to be a church that wants to offer perspective. But the pulpit, it can't be used as a partisan bully horn, right? So I can be prophetic, I can be political and not be partisan. I'm not going to stand up and say, even though I wanted to, Trump should not be elected and he will do significant damage and what he did. And, there go people watching this that are probably going to be angry about that. But that's what I said. I said the day that he was elected, the night before we were watching him, we got more and more scared. And our son went to bed. And at the time he was 16 years old. And he came in the next morning. We were still in bed. And he came in with tears running down his cheek. And he said, how did this happen? And we said, it happened. We got to deal with it. We got to move on. And I said, what's causing the tears? And he said, how long will your marriage be valid? Mm. And that's the kind of pain we have to address. The folks who are fearful of their immigration status, of their process of being in a unionized, workshop and all of this pain that's out there. And I think from the pulpit, we say, we don't have all the answers and we don't know what's going to happen next, but let's be faithful. Being faithful means following the teachings of Jesus, to love one another, to love our neighbor, to, as Micah 6:8, which is tattooed on my arm, to do justice, to love mercy, and walk humbly with God. And if the church can do that loudly, proclaiming that gospel and that love loudly, because the other side is so loud right now, it's getting drowned out. If we can do that from the pulpit, and if we can do that in the way we walk in the world, then we begin to make the normative understanding of Christian again be a loving, kind, welcoming place. And that's going to take a lot of work, because it has turned in a direction that I think is so unhealthy and so unhelpful and so diametrically opposed to who the church is called to be, that move is going to be hard. Have you ever been out on a wake runner, on a jet ski?
Do I look like someone who's done? I'm kidding.
I'm just kidding.
No. No.
All right. You watch a jet ski. They come, they zip to the side. They zip to the side. I mean, you're just cutting and turning, right? The church is not that. The church is a massive aircraft carrier that takes 5 miles to turn. We're not the zip and change kind of place. We're often that massive boat. Well, I don't want to really use a military, but these huge these huge ships, container ships. It takes them 5 miles to turn. Mm-hmm. And we're in that moment where the barge has begun to turn, and how do we redirect it? And what is the way that we do that? How do we continue to maybe pull that back to the center and find a place where we're being the church and we love each other and we call for justice? And that doesn't run us out on a rail. Sometimes we have to preach with our bags packed.
Yeah.
We have to proclaim the gospel in a way that we know we might get sent home, but I'm going to preach it anyway. That's the urgency.
We have time for, I think, one more question. And you're inviting us into gospel work. You're inviting us into what Jesus commanded us to do. It's also daring and a little dangerous work. Mm-hmm. It's a real uncomfortable place to be. And you just kind of alluded there to just needing to know you might have to go. What else? What other advice, to enter into that fray might you have for
them? I think one of the things that's happening in our world right now, particularly in the U.S., but it's happening in other parts of the world, is we just become so fractured that we don't listen to each other. That there's, I'm right, and the other is wrong. No matter what, they're wrong. And I have some family members. I have some friends growing up in Texas and in the South that have fallen into that. This is going to sound judgmental, but from my reading of the gospel, when you go off the deep end, denying the rights of others, right? That you've lost the story, you've lost the point. And so what I say is, that's not how I read the Bible. Could we talk about where you got that and why that is important to you? And acknowledge that at the end of this conversation, we may still be in two different places, but I want to hear you. I may not agree with you, but I want to hear you and where this comes for you, where this understanding of the Bible, or this understanding of faith, or this understanding of political, pluralism and witness and all that has sort of come into conflict. So share with me who you are, and I want to share with you who I am. And I want to say that I acknowledge that you have a place in that you feel like you're being completely true to the faith of your forefathers and mothers and your denomination. But I got to say that's not where I can be. And I wish that we could find a way where we really look at the teachings of Jesus and we find a way to come back together in a way some of those conversations I've tried to have with friends and family, and it has just severed our relationship. Mm-hmm. They just said, I can't be in relationship with you. I can't follow your Facebook feed. I can't follow your Twitter or your Instagram post because I just think you're 100%, 1000% wrong. And I have to say to them with grace, I love you. And I wish that we heard the gospel in the same way, but I can't follow you either. I can't go down that path that what I feel bastardizes the gospel. I can't follow you down that path where immigrants are the enemy and where the queer community has to be saved or if they go to hell. And I can't be with you when you say that the insurrection didn't happen and that Black Lives Matter is in Antifa. We're the ones who are in, the Capitol on January 6th. And I have friends who've fallen down that rabbit hole and I can give them a rope and I can say, can we talk? But they're probably sitting out there at the same time saying, I wish I could save Karyn. I wish I could save her from the left. I wish I could save her from, her liberal, progressive understanding of the world. And that's where we live in. So we have to try to make those small steps. And so the best advice I can get is talk. Talk to someone who is diametrically opposed to your position and say, I just want you to know that I hear you. And I honor where you are. I can't be there, and I wish you weren't there. And even that, it still sounds judgmental, but that's the conversations I'm having right now. Mm-hmm. And I invite us to listen, but also to speak. We can listen and still say, nope, not going to go there. That's not okay. You can't condemn trans kids. You can't deny women their reproductive rights. You can't deny immigrants any kind of hope. And so, yeah, I think that, I try to approach the world and conversations with others with an open heart and an open ear, but also with a passion and an urgency to proclaim that the gospel of Jesus Christ says all are welcome. That's what we say. Jesus Christ loves you and all are welcome. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wiseman. Thank you for joining me today. Where do you want to be found online? I'm myself on Facebook. It's just Karyn L. Wiseman. My Twitter is TexPreach, TXPREACH. That's also my Instagram, and they can join me any way they want to. If you've got a question, you can email me. It's kwiseman@uls.edu. So yeah, I'd love to have follow-up conversations with folks who would like to do that. Even if you disagree with me and you just stumbled upon this interview, I'd love to have a conversation with you. And I'll listen, but I also want to be heard too. That's a wonderful invitation. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Oh my gosh, it was such a good conversation. I enjoyed it so much.
I really appreciate it. Yeah. And thank you everybody for listening. And until next time, peace and blessings to you all. Goodbye.
Yeah, God loves you, and so do I.